slavery. And, I'm going to let some of our speakers tonight talk a little bit more about that. But with that being said, I'll introduce our speakers for the evening. So we have with us Sylvia Bernstein. She is the Colorado Coalition Coordinator for the Yes on National Popular Vote campaign and the co-chair of the Coloradans for National Popular Vote Grassroots Issue Committee. Prior to being involved with the National Popular Vote, Sylvia ran the major fundraising benefit for the Boulder County Democratic Party and was very active in the GOTV drive for the 2018 midterm election. She has recently retired from starting and running a business with her husband that supplied products to aquaponic gardeners in the United States and is the author of the best-selling book, Aquaponic Gardening, Growing Fish and Vegetables Together. Prior to that, she was the Vice President of Marketing and Product Development at AeroGrow International. She is a member of the League of Women Voters on the board of the Democratic Women of Boulder County and a volunteer and board member of Meals on Wheels of Boulder County. We're really excited to have Sylvia with us tonight. Also with us is Senator Mike Foote. In 2019, Mike Foote was elected to represent Senate District 17, which covers Eastern Boulder County. He currently serves as chair of the State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee and is a member of the Appropriations Committee, Transportation and Energy Committee, and the Committee on Legal Services. He formerly served 6 years in the Colorado House of Representatives. And while at the state legislature, Mike has worked to increase voter access and pass campaign finance reforms, protect survivors of sexual assault, bring more vocational and technical associate degree programs to Colorado's K-12 programs, reform oil and gas rules, and protect our environment against climate change. He has passed several first-in-the-nation bills, including the 2013 Crimes Against Pregnant Women Act, a 2016 bill allowing mental health providers to warn schools of significant safety threats, and comprehensive oil and gas reform in 2019. He was the Senate sponsor of the 2019 National Popular Vote bill. And prior to his time as legislator, Senator Foote was Deputy District Attorney in Durango and Boulder, a volunteer for several local campaigns, and a member of the Truman National Security Project. He is now an attorney in private practice, specializing in litigation and environmental law matters. Senator Foote received his undergraduate degree from Indiana University, his master's degree from the University of Denver, and his law degree from the University of Colorado. Mike and his wife Heidi have lived in Lafayette for over 14 years and have 2 young daughters. They all can be found enjoying Boulder County's open spaces as often as possible, which sounds very nice. And we are very honored to have Senator Foote with us tonight, and I'm going to pass it over to Senator Foote.
Great, thank you very much, Jillian, and we really appreciate you allowing us to be on this seminar, and we're really impressed by the number of people that you've turned out to this seminar. So thank you very much. And of course, I don't want to forget to mention this, but I'll say it up front that we really appreciate ACLU's support of Yes on National Popular Vote as well. And what I plan on doing here in a second is pulling up a PowerPoint slide. It's got maybe 10 or 11 slides. It won't go all that long. It's pretty short. It is designed to go over just from a more of a higher level perspective. There will probably be questions afterwards, which is totally fine. That's exactly what we want, because we think the Q&A section is actually much more valuable, because you can hear what's going on with the National Popular Vote. You'll hear about the ballot measure this fall, and you probably will have questions. And so the National Popular Vote, I'll just say, I'll give you just a very high-end summary of it. It's pretty straightforward. There's the straightforward concept that I hope that you'll take away from this seminar is the National Popular Vote means one person will truly equal one vote. One person equals one vote for the presidential election. That's what a National Popular Vote will bring once it's adopted by enough states. And then the other thing I hope that you'll take away from this is that when a National Popular Vote goes into effect, when adopted by enough states, it means the presidential candidate with the most popular votes throughout the country will actually win the election. So the most votes wins, and one person equals one vote. Now, I always like to kind of show off this really thick book that has all this stuff in it. Every vote equal. It's about 1,000 pages. It's a huge book. It's a really interesting book for nerds like myself. You probably won't want to read it, but you don't have to read it, because really what it comes down to are those two concepts that I mentioned. But I'll give you at the end of the presentation a website that has this book on it for free. and it's got all kinds of information if you really want to dig into it. And if you want to just go wild with figuring everything there is to know about the national popular vote, there's resources to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint at this point, and we'll get going with the presentation. Make sure you get your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do what we can to answer all of them before this presentation is over. So let's start from the beginning of the national popular vote, at least in Colorado. And it's not actually the beginning, because the national popular vote bill was first introduced in Colorado back in 2007. It didn't pass then, but it did pass in 2019. And as Julian mentioned, I was the Senate sponsor of the legislation. We put it into law, and clearly it passed, and Governor Polis signed it. And now it's on the ballot as a referendum this fall. And what the ballot question is going to ask is whether or not the people of the state of Colorado approve what we did back in 2019, which was join Colorado into the national popular vote interstate agreement. So if you are in favor of the national popular vote, which I hope all of you are, of course, on this call, if you are in favor of the national popular vote, if you do believe in one person, one vote, you should be a yes on the ballot measure. Now, the national popular vote is not typically something that we deal with, or at least I should say these big constitutional presidential election issues are not typically ones that we deal with at the state level. But for reasons I'll go over in just a couple of minutes, we get to deal with this at the state level because of how the Electoral College is structured and the power that the states have in order to qualify, select, and allocate their electors to the Electoral College for the vote for president. So I was very honored to carry this piece of legislation, and I was very enthusiastic to do it as well, because I think that the national popular vote reform for president is the single biggest reform that we can make to our democracy at the state level. I really think that when it goes into effect, when enough states sign on, it will make a huge difference in our democracy through how we elect our president. You probably already know this, or most people on this call already know this, but because of the current system that we have and the winner-take-all system and the way that our electoral college is set up, and the lack of voter participation in many states, we have 50% or less in some states, even in presidential years. The winning presidential candidate only actually wins 18% or so of the votes throughout the country. So we have a president that takes office with only having about 18, maybe 20% of Americans actually vote for that person. And that is something that I think really hurts our democracy, and it also hurts the way that government works, and it really leads to voter cynicism, and it kind of feeds upon itself for voter non-participation. The national popular vote, I think, will actually change a lot of that. It will make the way that we elect our president much more representative. It will make more people realize that their vote counts. And actually, I think it will lead to better governing as well at the national level. So the national popular vote is designed to change and reform three main things about how we elect our president. Number one, unlike now, once a national popular vote goes into place, the most popular votes throughout the country for the presidential candidates, or I should say the presidential candidate that wins the most popular votes throughout the country, will actually win the election. Now, I know that we all know that that didn't happen back in 2016. I'm sure most people on this call know that didn't happen in 2000. But most people don't know, actually, that it happened 3 other times before that. So we've had 5 presidents take office without actually having won the majority of popular votes throughout the country. And in addition to that, there have been a number of near misses, meaning that if there was just a flip of, say, 10,000 to 20,000 votes in one particular quote-unquote swing state, then that would have happened more times than just for 5 presidents. Most recently, there was a near miss in 2004, where if John Kerry would have flipped 60,000 votes in the one state of Ohio, he would have become president, even though he lost the popular vote by about 1 million votes in that particular year. And 1976 was a similar situation. So we've had a number of near misses, and it's projected as there's less and less states really in play during the presidential election, there will be more near misses, or more instances like what happened in 2016, where the winner, in this case, the number 2 candidate or the runner-up, as shown in this cartoon here, actually ends up being the winner. And that's not good for democracy. It's not good for our country, and it's not good for the president that takes office, because they take office without nearly as much legitimacy as that person should have. So the national popular vote would change that. It would change it to make it very straightforward that the states that are in the national popular vote agreement, their electors actually go towards the presidential candidate that wins the most popular votes nationwide, period. And so there won't be any more questions about whether or not the presidential candidate that wins the most popular votes will actually win, because under a national popular vote, that will happen 100 times out of 100. Another issue the national popular vote will change is the current focus on just a couple of states. We're all familiar with the map of the United States, but this is really the way that the presidential candidates look at the United States during the general election. There's only a couple states that are up for grabs. These are competitive states. Some people call them swing states or battleground states. These are states that are closely divided between the Republican and Democratic candidates. These are the states under the current system where the presidential candidates focus almost all of their time, almost all of their resources. These are the states where the presidential candidates care about what the voters think. They poll in these states, they craft their messages around these states. In normal presidential years, like not COVID years, they visit these states quite a bit. In other years, like 2016 and 2012, we've had anywhere between 75% and 90% of presidential general campaign visits to just a handful of these closely divided or competitive or swing states. So you notice that Colorado's not on this map, nor are many other states. In fact, it's just a small number of states this time around that are considered to be competitive, and those are the states where the presidents care about the voters, and they care about what those voters think. And they don't really care about the other ones because they're either safely red or safely blue states. A national popular vote changes this because it treats the election for president just like a real American election. The office of president and vice president are our only nationwide elected offices, and the national popular vote, through the way it works, treats the presidential election like a true American election. So it's not just a statewide election times 50 states, it's actually a nationwide election for a nationwide elected office holder. And so therefore, what that means is that one person truly equals one vote, no matter where that person lives, and no matter who that person votes for throughout the entire country. One person, one vote is something that we all have aspired to. Our Constitution was supposed to have that particular viewpoint in it, and it didn't at the beginning, or certainly it wasn't practiced that way in the beginning. We've made improvements, and we need to continue to improve to make sure that actually every voter counts, every voter is equal, and one person truly equals one vote. The national popular vote puts that into play. It means that one person truly is one vote, no matter where that person lives. So if you live in the red state of Mississippi, but you're voting for the Democrat, your vote actually counts. It matters. If you're living in the blue state of Illinois, but you want to vote for the Republican, your vote actually counts. In Colorado, everybody's vote would count no matter who that person votes for. And it would be like that in every other state under a national popular vote. Like I said before, it treats the presidential election like a true nationwide election. And just like our statewide elections, where one person actually equals one vote, no matter where that person lives, no matter where the county that person lives in, it would be the same way under a national election, under a national popular vote. So this is really the bottom line main concept that we are so thrilled about, assuming the national popular vote becomes the actual way that we elect our president, because it will lead to many things. It will lead to, number one, of course, realizing the vision that one person should equal one vote. It will lead to, I think, less voter cynicism, more voter participation, because now there's millions of voters that know their vote doesn't really matter. If they are a Democrat that lives in Mississippi, their vote for president is not going to matter because it's not going to be in the majority. And likewise, if they're a Republican in Illinois, same thing. So that the national popular vote gets rid of all of that. It just means that your vote matters. Your vote is equal to everyone else's vote, and one person truly equals one vote. Also, I think it's important to mention under a national popular vote, it will increase social and racial justice in this country, and really reform that aspect. And it's such an important area that we're focusing on now. I think it's worthy of its own slide here. It was mentioned at the beginning by Julian about the origins of the Electoral College. I think most people on this this virtual presentation know that at the beginning, the compromise that occurred with the founders was to count slaves as 3/5 of a white person for the purposes of allocation for representation in Congress. And I think you know that our Electoral College comes through the representation from Congress. So if you have, like Colorado, 7 congressional seats plus 2 senators, that means that you have 9 electoral votes. So what it did after that compromise from our founding was it gave the southern states a huge disproportionate influence in not only how they were represented in Congress, but also who was elected president. And so, of course, the southern states really liked that. Now, the 3/5 compromise no longer existed after the 14th Amendment in 1868, but still the southern states engaged in pretty massive voter suppression of African American votes. And so still, therefore, white Southerners were disproportionately influenced even after the 3/5 rule was eliminated. So this is all because of the way that our Electoral College is currently set up. And the way that it is now, at least where we have populations that live, it means that there are a huge number of African American, Latinx, and other minority communities that live in these so-called safe states or flyover states, not the important states for the purposes of the presidential election, but safe states. So they are, just like everybody else in those states, are virtually ignored by the presidential candidates. So the candidates don't really speak to those communities because they know that they don't really have to campaign in those communities, because they know that the state is going to go either blue or red no matter what they do. So they don't poll in those communities, they don't speak to those communities, they don't take up the issues that are important to those communities. But under a national popular vote, the presidential candidates would have to campaign throughout the country in all the communities. And in order to win, they would have to speak to all communities, including communities that have been ignored, including these African American communities or Latinx communities or other communities that have been ignored under our system. So just imagine presidential candidates that actually have to compete for these votes, that actually have to go into states where a huge number of this minority population lives in order to be able to win the presidency and really speak towards those issues that those populations care about. That's what the national popular vote would do. And again, as I say, it's an exciting prospect because it will mean that everybody's voice matters in every community. And the presidential candidates will have to account for that. And hopefully they'll actually govern that way once they're elected. So I want to go to the task at hand here, which is the vote that's coming up. I think we're going to be getting our ballots here within probably about a month and a half or so, maybe even less than that. And what you're going to see on the ballot is a statewide ballot measure called Proposition 113. Proposition 113, as I mentioned before, is a referendum to make sure that the people of the state of Colorado approve what we did in the legislature back in 2019 and what Governor Polis signed. And this is what the ballot language is going to be. It's going to be pretty straightforward, which is actually a relief because there's plenty of ballot measures that aren't that way. It's not going to be a half-page long like some of the Tabor measures that we've seen in the past. It just simply asks, shall the following act of the General Assembly be approved? And that's an act concerning the adoption of an agreement among the states to elect the president by a national popular vote. And it refers to the Senate bill number as well that passed in 2019. So, as I said before, if you are in favor of the national popular vote, if you believe in one person, one vote, if you think that the most popular vote should win and the presidential candidate should actually campaign throughout the country, you should be a yes on Proposition 113 because you're a yes on the national popular vote. So I want to mention really quickly, we have a number of endorsements, a number of nonpartisan and social justice groups that have endorsed us. We're very proud of that, including the League of Women Voters, who actually have supported the idea of a direct election of president since 1970 and a national popular vote, interstate agreement like what we passed last year, since 2006. So this idea of a national popular vote's been around for quite some time. It wasn't just something that was hatched up after the 2016 election, like some people, opponents of one person, one vote, seem to think. But it's been around for quite some time, and the League of Women Voters Support have been around for quite some time as well as a number of organizations you see here, including up on the top of the right-hand column, the ACLU of Colorado, which I said before we're very appreciative of their support and help throughout this campaign to make sure that we get enough yes votes to keep this national popular vote agreement in Colorado law. One thing that I've noticed that I have not gone over in the slideshow that there may be questions about is when the national popular vote would take effect. And I just thought I would mention that right at the outset here. Colorado is one of 15 states plus Washington, D.C. that have said that they are members of the National Popular Vote Interstate Agreement. So that represents 196 electoral votes. You need to have enough states with 270 electoral votes, which is what it takes to win the presidency, in order for the national popular vote to go into effect. So we're 2/3 of the way there. Once enough states with 74 more electoral votes come on board, then it will become the law of the land. So it's not going to happen by this election, clearly, but it could happen as early as 2024, and certainly we hope that it does. Okay, so this is a slide just describing really quick what you can do if you are really interested in helping us out, and of course we hope that you are. We have a volunteer process at Outreach Circle that you can sign up at. This QR code over here on the right side of the slide, the right bottom side of the slide, is going to take you directly there, but we can go into more detail or give you a specific website if you're interested in the chat box. We, of course, would love you to follow our Facebook page. We keep that very up to date. We post at least 1 or 2 things a day on there. And, of course, like any other statewide campaign, we need the resources in order to get our message out. So to the extent you can, we would love to have a donation from you to help us do that and get ads on TV, ads on the radio, ads on social media, and everything else you got to do in order to be successful. Now, there's 2 websites at the bottom. The nationalpopularvote.com website is the one that has a free copy of that book that I showed you at the beginning. And one really cool thing about the book is it goes through pretty much every myth that has ever been said about the national popular vote and answers those myths. So if you're talking to somebody and they say, well, this is actually something that will help big states over small states, or this is something that's unconstitutional, or some similar myth, and you don't quite remember the answer, then you can just go to this website and look it up, and it'll give you a very good answer. It'll give you a concise answer and then a longer answer about why that myth is actually a myth. And then the yesonnationalpopularvote.com website is the Colorado-specific Proposition 113 Yes on National Popular Vote website, so we encourage you to check that out as well. So that's all I have for the actual presentation. I've been kind of watching the screen for the Q&A. It looks like we've got at least 15 questions here at this point, which is totally what I would expect from this group. And so I think Sylvia is going to moderate that and answer it or throw it over to me or whatever's going to work the best. So thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to answering all the questions that you have for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, great job, Mike. We have a lot of questions, and they're really good. I'm just going to start at the top and start going through. So, and I haven't done this on, okay. We are now answering a question by Mike. He said, how close are we to passing the national popular vote on a national level?
Yeah, you probably asked that question before I got to that at the end, but yeah. We're 2/3 of the way there. So that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. There's challenges ahead, but the national popular vote bill has been introduced in almost every state. It certainly hasn't passed every state. Sometimes it takes multiple times like it did in Colorado. But the national organization is very active. It was introduced in, I think, maybe 3 or 4, perhaps 5 states this last time around, but it didn't pass because most legislatures had to recess like we did for COVID, and then after that, it just became more of an issue to try to focus on what was truly important with COVID response, and the national popular vote bills got put to the side. So we'll see what happens in 2021, but we're certainly hoping that we can continue to add 2 or 3 states each year, and before you know it, we'll actually have enough states.
The next question is from Daryl. So it's kind of long here. I'm just going to summarize. He asks, how will your system deal with the problem of no person receiving a majority of the votes? Neither candidate received a majority of votes cast in the 2016 election. So how does your system address that?
Yeah, good question. And that's why we always talk about the most votes wins, the most popular votes wins, because it doesn't have to be 50% plus one. It just has to be the most. Just like in a governor's race anywhere, if you have three candidates and one candidate gets 40%, one gets 30%, one gets 20%. I'm not even sure if that adds up to 100, but at any rate, you get the picture. The one with 40% actually wins. I mean, that scenario for the presidential race is not too far-fetched because we had an independent candidate that was strong back in '92. I think that candidate got something like 15% of the national vote. But that was the year that Bill Clinton got, I think, 40% or so, and George W. Bush got less. So that's how it would work. The most votes wins. It doesn't have to be 50% plus one. It's just the most votes.
So along that line, Mike, I'm going to jump ahead to a question that somebody asked about ranked choice voting. And how do you feel about ranked choice, blended in with national popular vote?
Well, of course, I mean, I think that ranked choice voting should be something that localities and states try if they choose to do so. And I'm pretty sure that there's at least one state that's seriously considered doing it statewide. So however the states want to record their votes is fine. There's nothing that's going to change about that. The national popular vote doesn't change how votes or how statewide elections are run. It just means that the most votes end up getting tallied up at the very end, just like they do now, but it actually means something this time. So, we see at during coverage of the presidential races, they always have the number of votes throughout the country that actually each candidate received. But then there's the real election about the electoral college, and they show all the states. Well, in this case, that wouldn't be part of it. It would just add up the number of votes from every state, regardless of how they got there, and the most votes throughout the entire country ends up winning.
From Eve. Can the referendum, if it passes or does not pass, negate the legislative vote? Or would it just be considered a recommendation from the population of Colorado?
Another good question, and it's not surprising that there's a question about this because we actually haven't done one of these types of referenda since the 1930s. So this is something that most people are not familiar with, but it is binding. So if the majority of Coloradans vote yes, then that means it stays in the law. If the majority of Coloradans vote no, that means that it is taken out of the law. So that's why, of course, we're running a very diligent campaign because we want to make sure it stays in the law. And we want to make sure it stays in the law not just because we believe in it, but also because we think it's going to send a big message either way to the rest of the country, and particularly the other states that are considering putting national popular vote into their law. So if the yes vote actually passes here, then it's going to be a big message to the other states. I think it'll be something that leads to a lot of momentum to make sure that we get the additional 74 electoral votes that we need. And also it works the other way. If there's a no vote here, then that's going to have a chilling effect in the other states too. So Colorado is, not surprisingly, kind of at the forefront of something like this. And what happens here is going to have national implications, I think, for the way that we elect our president. So that's why it's just really important to get the word out and to volunteer and do whatever you can to help the campaign, assuming that you believe in the national popular vote like we do.
Gail is asking, would this require a constitutional amendment when the right number of states have approved it? So to put it past the final hump, is it going to require a constitutional amendment?
No, it does not require a constitutional amendment. So if you wanted to amend the Electoral College, or if you wanted to eliminate it, then that would require a constitutional amendment. But what the national popular vote does is it uses the power that the states have already in Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution to choose and allocate their electors in whichever way the state deems to be appropriate. And that actually has occurred in many different ways throughout the course of our history. It just so happens that right now, 48 out of the 50 states have the same system, which is called the winner-take-all system. Colorado is one of those. And in short, what that means is that whichever candidate wins 50% plus one within the borders of that state gets all of those states' electoral votes. That's what leads to so many votes just being thrown to the side because they're not voting within the majority. So 48 out of 50 states have the winner-take-all system, but there's nothing in the Constitution that requires that. And in fact, for the first 50 to 75 years of our history, there were many different systems that were used in how to allocate the electors, but the states ultimately settled for the most part on the winner-take-all. So the founders gave the states wide discretion as to how to allocate their electors, and that's the power that the national popular vote draws upon in order to make sure that we get to one person, one vote, and the most votes wins. We just use the power that's already granted to the states under the Constitution, so no amendment would be necessary.
You definitely answered this in the presentation. This question was asked kind of midway through, so it's possible this doesn't even hold anymore, but just to make absolutely sure, because this is pretty important, if this passes in Colorado, what happens next? Will every state need to pass it in order for it to happen at the federal level?
Yeah, that last part I definitely did not talk about in the presentation, so happy to talk about it now. The short answer is no. You only have to have enough states that equal 270 electoral votes to pass it before it becomes the way that we elect our president. So it does not have to be every state that passes it. However, this is important though, even though not every state would pass it, still every voter in every state would still matter. So every vote in every state would still count. Let's say that Oklahoma still decides not to pass it, even though we have our 270 electors and it becomes the law of the land. Voters in Oklahoma will still count towards the grand total, and they will still matter, and it will still be one person, one vote in Oklahoma, even if that state doesn't pass membership into the national popular vote.
Okay, Rebecca, if this proposition passes, would the Electoral College have any effect on elections anymore?
Well, certainly not the effect that it has now under the winner-take-all system. I mean, the Electoral College stays in place because, as I said, the only way to get rid of it is to do a constitutional amendment, which is, there have been many times that it's been tried and it never passes, obviously. So it certainly would not look the same as it looks now, but the Electoral College would still be in place. The difference would be that all of our electors and the electors in the member states would all just vote for the candidate that wins the most votes nationwide. So that's how it works, really. That's the specifics of how it actually works. So the Electoral College remains, but it's not the Electoral College that you knew beforehand.
Due to differences of opinions about the legality of MPV, how likely would it become effective and how long would it take? So there's kind of two questions in there about, I'm gathering, about the legality and what it takes to become effective.
Right. So, so first of all, the main group that has been opposing national popular vote laws throughout the country is based out of Oklahoma, and they've already promised that if this were to pass enough states, they would commence a lawsuit immediately. So we know that there's going to be litigation. I happen to believe that their claims about the unconstitutionality of the national popular vote are very far-fetched. Like I said, it draws upon the inherent and plenary authority of the states to allocate their electors the way they see fit. And as a matter of fact, there was a case that recently came out that I think many of you probably followed. It was the so-called faithless elector case that involved electors in 2016, a couple in Colorado and a couple in Washington, where some of the language, it didn't deal with national popular vote, but some of the language in the opinion, again, very strongly reaffirmed states' rights to allocate the electors in the way that their state legislatures choose to do so. And it was very strong language from a unanimous opinion. The two of the conservative justices signed off on the opinion, but they thought it didn't necessarily have to do with Article 2, Section 1, but instead the 10th Amendment, which was state rights. But either way, we have 8 Supreme Court justices, because one recused, we have 8 of them that that agree that the states have the right to do what we're attempting to do. So there will be litigation, and being a lawyer myself, I can tell you that I'm sure there will be arguments that the other side will come up with, but I feel strongly that it's going to be upheld and found to be constitutional.
What should we say in response to people who are worried about the rural areas losing power?
Yeah, good question. We hear that sometimes, and there's a couple of things I would say to that. One is a little bit more wonky than the next. The less wonky answer I would give you is, how do you think they're doing now? I mean, are presidential campaigns really paying attention to rural areas and rural states now? Like, when was the last time that a presidential candidate visited the state of Idaho during the general election, or polled in the state of North Dakota, or, you know, let's take it out of red states to the state of Vermont, which is actually the most rural state in the country per capita. So that doesn't happen. They don't visit those states. They don't poll in those states. They don't advertise in those states. They don't care about those states because they're not swing states. So rural states, which many times are smaller states population-wise, are not receiving any attention now. The only rural areas that are receiving attention are those that happen to be in swing states. So if you live in a rural area in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, the presidential candidates love you. They want to pay attention to you all day long because you are in a swing state. But if you're in a rural spot in Colorado, which is not a swing state, or Utah or Kansas, which are not swing states, your area is not getting any attention from the presidential candidates. And therefore, when one of the candidates wins, they take lessons from their victory to the Oval Office, and their policies go to actually help disproportionately those states that they need to win. So again, rural states or rural areas and swing states matter to them. Rural areas and rural states that aren't swing states do not matter. So that's the less wonky answer I'll give you. The wonkier answer I'll give you comes down to population. And I think a lot of people really underestimate the population in rural areas compared to the urban areas. The top 100 urban areas, or I should say the top 100 cities in our country, and to give you a little bit of idea, the 100th biggest city in our country is Spokane, Washington. So the top 100 cities actually represent 15% of our population. And as it turns out, the top 100 cities vote roughly 60% for the Democrat, but 40% for the Republican. It's not 100% one way or the other. So 15% of our population is in the top 100 cities. 15% of our population also lives in the rural areas of this country. They happen to vote 60% for the Republican, 40% for the Democrat. So I don't think anybody would actually think that or claim that the national popular vote is going to mean that the rural areas of the country would be in charge. But if that's what you think, then you should also not think that the top 100 cities are going to be in charge either, because the population levels of the top 100 cities and the rural areas of the country is the same. Under a national popular vote, one person equals one vote no matter where you live. So if you live in the top 100 cities or you live in the rural areas, your vote's going to be the same no matter what.
Okay. Love that we got a wonky answer and a less wonky answer. Lene is asking, is Colorado giving up anything if NPV is not adopted nationwide? And the answer is no.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at there. I mean, if national popular vote does not pass, ultimately, if it not, then we have the current system. And for many reasons, I've already indicated why I think the current system is not sufficient. Under a national popular vote, I think, just to bring it to Colorado, since you asked specifically about Colorado, it would mean that every vote in Colorado actually matters. And so I'll give you, a quick example. Again, a few numbers here, but won't get too wonky. But in 2016, 1.2 million Coloradans voted for Donald Trump for president. Now, 1.3 million Coloradans voted for Hillary Clinton. So Hillary Clinton got all 9 of our electoral votes. But those 1.2 million Coloradans that voted for Donald Trump they turned into 0 electoral votes from the state of Colorado. So those votes were just tossed aside. So under a national popular vote, every single Coloradan's vote would actually matter. It would all count towards the grand total, regardless of who you voted for. Now, it's not just the Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton thing. I mean, look at the other states around us. If you add up the number of votes for Hillary Clinton in, say, Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma, those also equal about 1.2 million votes. So there was 1.2 million Democratic votes in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Utah for Hillary Clinton that also got thrown to the side because they did not vote in the majority of their states. So it all equals out throughout the entire country. But the real true voice of Colorado is all the Coloradan voters. Every single voter here should matter. Everybody should count, and everybody should be equal. And that's the true voice of Colorado. So we don't have that under the current system. So if we stay with the current system, then, you know, if you vote in the majority, things are pretty good. But if you do not vote in the majority, your vote gets tossed aside. And as I've said in several different ways, that's just not a very democratic way or a very good way to elect our president.
Okay. So I kind of have a cluster of 3 questions here that are basically getting at the same thing. Mike is asking, have any of the red states passed the national popular vote? Lynn is asking, what organizations are against this change and why? And so, yeah, let's sort of take those in combination. So red states and who's against this?
Right, so I'll give you a little bit of a big picture and then kind of take it down to those specific questions. So first of all, as I said before, the National Popular Vote Interstate Agreement actually has been around for quite some time. It was first introduced in 2006. It was first passed in Maryland in 2007. That was the first state that passed it. So it's been around for a little bit of time, this particular idea. And it's been polled actually in many states, and it's been run in many states too. It hasn't passed, obviously, the majority of states, but it's been run in many states and polled in many states. And it's been very consistent that the majority of people in each state, including currently red states, believes in the idea of a national popular vote. And that's just across the board. It happens in every state. Now, having said that, we did see a change in the polling after 2016. In 2016, the amount of conservative support for the idea of a national popular vote went down quite a bit. You know, before that, it was, say, 45, 40%. Now it's a lot less than that in most states where it's polled. And the only explanation I can give for that is I think it was because of the 2016 election and because that's how Trump, the way that Trump won. And like so many things, it seems to be about Donald Trump rather than anything else. I think a lot of conservatives and red states look at this as more of a referendum against Trump rather than really what it is, which is an idea to make sure that every vote counts and every vote is equal. So as we go along away from Donald Trump's presidency at some point in time, I think that dynamic will change, but we're living in the middle of that dynamic right now. So that's a long way of saying that there have been no current red states that have passed the national popular vote throughout the entire process. There have been a number of Republican-controlled chambers and legislatures that have passed it, including in Oklahoma, as a matter of fact, or I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And so it passes some of those legislatures, but it has not gone through in any current red state. Now, things can change, and we certainly hope that they will, because there's going to have to be some currently red states that come on board in order to make this, to get your 270 electoral votes. And things could change pretty quickly. I mean, it depends on what happens with this election. In the unlikely event that Joe Biden wins the presidency after losing the national popular vote, I think we're going to see a big change in some of the red state ideas about the national popular vote. If the Democrats happen to win the vote in Texas, which certainly I'll believe it when I see it, but if that happens, I think we're going to see a change in some conservative ideas about the national popular vote. But in this moment of time, it seems to be amongst some of those folks more of a referendum against Donald Trump than really what it is. It's not intended for that at all. Now, that goes to the opposition that's in this state. Unfortunately, the Republican elected officials have locked down very early against the national popular vote. Despite my efforts and other efforts to try to get them on board, they just locked down very early because they saw it as something that dealt with Donald Trump or a reaction against Donald Trump, unfortunately. And so we see the opposition to one person, one vote really being those that are, for the most part, Trump supporters. The donor network for the opposition, it comes mostly from Cory Gardner donors, and I think it's something like 80% is Cory Gardner donors. So we see a lot of opposition from those types of folks, and that's just what we're having to deal with. I think it's an unfortunate sign of the times. The national popular vote has never been about a partisan advantage, and in fact, there are a number of prominent Republicans that are a part of national popular vote on the national level, just like there's a number of prominent Democrats. And we do our best to keep it nonpartisan here as well. But unfortunately, the other side really seems to be appealing to more of the partisan argument and more of a Donald Trump reaction than we would like to see.
Okay. This is an interesting question that we don't see very often. Is there a margin that would cause a runoff election, i.e. within 10,000 votes nationwide between two candidates?
No, there's nothing like that. That provision's not in the national popular vote. So, I guess I would just say a short no to that. But that's an interesting question. Yeah, I haven't really heard that before.
Yeah,
so
I haven't.
We'll have to give you some kind of award for that after this presentation.
Exactly, the question we haven't heard. Sorry, there's so many questions here. Are there other states that are considering NPV on their ballot this year?
No, Colorado's the only one, and actually Colorado's fairly unique, although I shouldn't say we're totally unique. I don't know this for a fact, but there's certainly not many states that have the provision in their state constitution that we do, which allows for a citizens referendum on a law that the legislature passes. And so it's not surprising that other states are not considering it on their ballot, because Colorado is one of a few, or maybe just only one, that actually has this provision. As I said before, there's a number of states that were considering being part of the national popular vote before the COVID thing hit, and none of that passed this year. But to give you a flavor, last year we had 3 states that adopted it. Colorado was one. Actually, it was 4 states, 3 states in addition to Colorado. Colorado was one, Delaware was one, New Mexico and Oregon were the other ones. So 4 states in 2019. I think there was 4 or 5 that actually were actively considering it this year. But even so, that wouldn't have got us to the 270 that was needed to affect the 2020 election.
Here's a quick one for you to answer. Can NPV be reversed by states in the future once it's approved?
Yes, there's a provision in the law that says 6 months out of the general election, the legislature can decide they no longer want to be part of the national popular vote. And that's universal throughout the states that are part of the agreement.
Okay. Brittany is asking, can you share the most common example or 2 of what detractors from this bill will say, and what is an effective rebuttal?
Yeah, well, so what you're going to hear about is California. I'll just summarize it that way. I mean, they're pretty obsessed with California. Every time that they talk about it, every time they write about it, they try to put in the word California as many times as possible. And so there's a couple things going on there. I mean, what they'll say is that California is going to take Colorado's votes, or Colorado is going to be overshadowed by California. It's the California boogeyman that you're definitely going to hear about in whatever advertising that they manage to do. So there's a couple things about this, as I said. One, it's a little bit of a code word for Democrats are going to dominate the presidency. You know, what they talk about is they say California is going to dominate the vote, and therefore it's going to decide who becomes president. Sometimes they throw in the state of New York. They say California, New York's going to determine who the presidency, or who wins the presidency. New York is only the 4th biggest state. They usually leave out Texas and Florida. Texas being a Republican state and Florida being a split state. They leave that out. But at any rate, what they're basically saying is, at least to their base, is that if the national popular vote passes, Democrats will win the presidency every time. That's not going to happen. Actually, the math just doesn't support that. And I'll give you a couple of numbers to support it. Number one, California makes up 12% of the population of the country. So, looking at it just on the surface, 12% is a lot less than what you need for the 50%, assuming there's only two candidates to actually win. But also, if you go a little deeper, not everybody in California actually votes for the Democrat. There's millions of Republicans in California as well. So, yes, the Democratic candidates have won ever since 1992 in California. And it's about 60%, maybe 61% right now. But there's millions of people that vote for Republicans. By the way, none of those votes actually matter because they don't vote in the majority of California, so they don't go to the grand total. So there's just no way by the math for California to actually do that. And if California actually could determine who the president would be, then I'd love to introduce you to President Gore and President Kerry and President Hillary Clinton, because California voted for all three of those. And clearly those people did not become president. So that's really the main thing you're going to hear. Like I said, the math doesn't really add up. And really, when you count one person for one vote, everybody's vote matters, including Republicans in California, which really, I think, blunts the argument that it's going to disproportionately benefit Democrats.
Okay. We are approaching, we're 4 minutes from 5 o'clock, so I think we can probably do one more. So I'm going to try to find one that isn't a big, long question. And apologies to everybody whose question we didn't get to. They just kept coming in.
But also, before you get to that, Sylvia, I'll just mention that I'm happy to answer those questions. I think there was an email address that was given somewhere. Julie might have it also.
Yes.
We'll answer the questions through email or whatever.
That sounds great. While you answer this next question, I will put our email addresses in the chat box. How about this from Leslie? What would happen to the Electoral College? Is it used for anything else?
Nope, it's just the election of our president. That's the point of it. And so I think we kind of went over that a little bit before. The Electoral College remains, but it just isn't a winner-take-all system. And so that's how it would be something different than what we're used to. What I'll say, though, just for the next 30 seconds or so, is talk a little bit about why the Electoral College came into play the way that it did. And really, it came into play not because of some grand idea that the founders had. It was really an issue of they couldn't decide how to actually elect a president throughout the entire Constitutional Convention. They discussed and debated many, many different ways, and they just could not decide. And so we face this all the time. We always put the tougher issues towards the end, or the issues that are unresolved towards the end. And then you pretty much run out of time, so you got to figure out, okay, what are we going to do about this issue? And that's exactly what the Electoral College was born from. They just really couldn't agree on how they were going to elect the president, so they punted it to the states, which is why they gave the states so much power in how to determine how to select their electors and how to allocate the electors. They basically said, look, let's just give this power to the states because we all can't agree on any other system. And so that's why under Article 2, Section 1, the language is what it is. And that's why even though the Electoral College under a national popular vote would not be the same that it is now, it still would exist and still, I think, would be something that is consistent with what the founders intended in giving that kind of broad plenary power to the states.
Thanks, Mike. We actually had a couple of questions we weren't going to get to about the history of the Electoral College, so
okay.
you snagged those as well. So yeah, let's wind it up at this point.
Yes, thank you both so much. That was incredibly informative. And Sylvia, every time I speak with you about National Popular Vote and just hearing Senator Foote talk about it, I get even more fired up to work on this election. So I'm really excited and appreciate you both sharing this information. And we had some great questions from our attendees. So thank you for all your questions. We are going to post this webinar on our website. We'll share it with Yes on National Popular Vote so they can share it, post it on Facebook. The biggest thing you could do to help this campaign is talk about it, talk about what you just learned. If you can, join the Yes on National Popular Vote campaign, volunteer with them. I'll post, Sylvia posted it once, but I'll post the way to sign up in the chat. She's made it actually really convenient and easy. I'm always taking notes from you, Sylvia. And, just help get out the vote. At the ACLU, we're going to be doing a lot of electoral work. So if you'd like to get involved, whether if it's with Yes on National Popular Vote or one of our phone banks, please reach out. My email, I'm going to post it in the chat as well. There's my email. Feel free to reach out. And then, just some things coming up on the ACLU. And we have a decarceration panel tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. You may be familiar with our decarceration efforts, but if not, we have plenty of opportunities for you to learn about them. We're going to have a virtual panel where families of people incarcerated in Colorado prisons can share about the dangers that their loved ones are facing during COVID-19 and talk about the urgency and need to decarcerate in order to protect our communities in and outside of detention. So I'll also drop the link for that. Sylvia, Senator Foote, thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we close out?
Just thanks again. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you to Julian and Delana. We just so appreciate your partnership and getting us to every vote being equal.
Super important. Thank you for all your work. I'm going to post one more thing in the chat because I realize I'm sending it to our panelists and not our attendees. And then also, cool. Well, thank you everyone, and have a good Tuesday night.